The reason I'm doing that is because this formula, it will be in everything that you do. If we take the view that every person in my life and every event in my life is a learning experience, you can take that view spiritually. In other words, you can say to yourself, okay, I'm a child of God and God is sending the lessons. Or you can just say, this has got nothing to do with God or the universe or anything. But every now and then, stuff happens, and if I don't learn from it, then I don't bring a new, improved version of me to the next time that something like it happens or whatever. And so it is possible for us to be going through life not getting better at doing life. So whether you think, well, I'm going to propose an idea for you, and it boils down to this. It's fair enough to say that we are doing a personal development workshop right now. The idea I'm going to propose to you is that we're not really. We're actually talking about the real personal development workshop, which is the process of life. And that what life is going to do is it's going to send you a bunch of lessons, and these lessons are going to be cunningly disguised as problems, events, people, and things that go wrong. And if you learn from those lessons, then you get to jump that hurdle and play at the next level. And we could say that if you are a very experienced person in life, you're probably playing at a higher level because you've learned a lot along the way. We could say that about you personally. We could say that about your career. We could say that about your marriage, your relationships. If you're a parent, we could say it about your parenting. There's a lot of our life that is how well we are doing at the moment is dependent on how much we've been able to learn as we went along. These things are sometimes not that difficult to learn, but do require time spent on it. So my parents and Mary's parents were not able to demonstrate a great relationship. So my parents were codependent on each other. They had their shit going on, and I'm not going to blame them or say that I had a bad childhood or anything like that. I'm just saying that they didn't have a great relationship. Mary's parents were even worse. What that meant is when Mary and I got together, we had to learn about how to build a relationship. That's not that difficult. Well, no, I should say it takes concentration, it takes insight, it takes awareness, and it takes effort, but it's not exactly rocket science. It's not exactly the most difficult thing on the planet. It is if one of us is not cooperating, but it's not beyond the realms to build a great relationship if you didn't have an example showing up early in your life. Mary's parents nor my parents had businesses of their own. So when we decided we were going to go into business 36 years ago, then we had no family example. It's one of my great regrets in life is that there was not a family conversation over the dinner table about business and what it meant and how to do it. So we had to learn that. I'm not complaining. What I'm saying is it was just another thing on the list of things we had to learn. And we learnt it, and we learnt it mostly by making mistakes, because that's how we learn about relationships. It's how we learn how to walk. It's kind of like, most of our life is. Most of the experience that we really value is hard-won experience, and usually there was some pain involved in learning it. If we learn to walk by falling over, then we probably learn how to build a business by, losing money. If we learn to build a great relationship, we probably do that by getting through disagreements and differing views of how things should be, etc. And if we can do that, if we can learn from something and apply it to our future life, then I call you a great student of life. So with that as a background, then what I want to suggest to you is that there's this other story running in the background we did in the first session. I'm going to do you a quick summary and then we'll move on to the next part. The summary is that some event happens early in our life which causes us great pain. I call it a wound. And that wound may happen several times. It may happen in several areas. It may be repeated wounding over and over for a long period of time. When you see some of the stuff in the newsfeed that, in my newsfeed, people, being groomed sexually and, sexually abused for years and years and years. It's horror stories. So I'm not trying to make small of these wounds. What I'm saying is that at some level, we all are wounded at some point, and there are all sorts of reactions to that. So some people need to get justice. Some people don't care. Some people want to move on. Some people want to bury it and never think about it again. Other people want to go through it. There's an intensely varied reaction to the wound. And so we do whatever suits us, whatever kind of comes to mind about how we're going to process that. And that might have a lot to do with support and might have a lot to do with education. And there's a whole raft of reasons why we will handle it differently. And so the wound takes place at some point because it's impossible for it to not to have taken place. In the wounding process and in the recovery from the wound, around the time of the wound, we make a decision about ourselves. And that decision about ourselves is about, this has happened to me because. This has happened to me because I'm unworthy. This has happened to me because no one loves me. This has happened to me because they don't care. This has happened to me because I was naughty. This has happened to me because I am stupid. This has happened to me. There's an infinite variety of why this has happened to me. And that informs a decision about self. So I'm a dumbass, or I'm no good, or I'm unlovable, or I'm unworthy, or whatever. The consequences of that decision about self lead to a belief. And I'll kind of, already start to say it. When you start a sentence with I am, the chances are what's going to follow is a belief. So I am from the wrong side of the tracks. I'm stupid. I am unlovable. Anything that starts with I am, if it's not true when you say it often enough and it'll become true. So be careful of the expression I am, because we inflict ourselves with whatever comes after I am. So that's a quick way of finding beliefs, is what do we say after I am? The belief, once it's established, then what happens is, okay, if I am unlovable, what are the behaviours that I can put into place that minimise the hurt to me of that belief? So that the workaholic becomes a behaviour, and we get into the behaviour because the behaviour minimises the pain. Apparently, anyway, at least. Having minimised the pain and spending a lot of time. In other words, at this point, there is a huge personal investment goes into the behaviour. Well, what time do workaholics start in the morning and what time do they finish in the afternoon, evening? Well, all we can say is earlier and earlier and later, because when I'm doing something and it's apparently working, then maybe I don't start at 9, maybe I'll start at 8. And if that's working, you understand what I mean by working? Hands up, wave if you understand what I mean by it's working. It's minimising the pain. Well, okay, start at 7. Okay, start at 6. Go through till 6. In fact, have dinner, do this or that or the other, and go back to work again. So I could be working from 9 p.m. until midnight. If that's distracting me, then that activity is pretty attractive. There's a lot of brownie points in it. There's a kind of lot of feedback that's going to propel me to keep going in that direction. Of course, some of these things are incredibly difficult to maintain, because if you're shopaholic, then you've got to fund that. And just finding the money to supply it, that rules a lot of people out. So shopaholic is not a realistic proposition simply because we can't fund it. But other things we can. So there's an infinite variety of possibilities when it comes to that. But as a consequence of the behaviour, what I need to justify this behaviour. Because to all intents and purposes, it's pretty ludicrous. And it's the 4-year-old who points it out to us, because they say things like, well, how come you're never here? Simple questions. How come Auntie Vi is so fat? The questions of 4-year-old that everybody just ducks for cover? They're usually a recognition of what we're actually looking at, but nevertheless, we'll go with that. So we start to tell a story. So Auntie Vi says, well, I've got a thyroid problem. Everybody says, everybody under their breath, everyone's saying to themselves, Auntie Vi eats like a fucking horse, right? But We're not going to say that to Auntie Vi because we haven't worked out how to not have a fight. We haven't worked out how to say that with compassion. We suspect that we're being judgmental and cruel anyway, and maybe she's got some issue and whatever, and so it's just easy if we avoid it. So the 4-year-old says, how come, Auntie Vi, how come you're fat? This is usually at Christmas when the whole family is there. And so at that point, we get a massive number of volunteers to do the washing up. Have any of you noticed that? When the 4-year-old pops it in front of everybody, it's kind of like, let's get out of here. So at this point, there's 25 people in the kitchen trying to do the washing up. So somebody makes up some bullshit excuse and the kid recognises it, doesn't know what to do with it, and all kind of gets washed under. But some story gets told. And, the common stories that Auntie Vi or her protectors, people who have got compassionate towards Auntie Vi are going to say, well, she's got big bones, or some kind of story. The problem with the story is not the story, but the problem with the story is if it gets told over and over again, it starts to take on remnants of the truth. It starts to feel real. It starts to feel like it has some substance and some validity. And so the story feeds itself. Of course, most stories won't work on their own, so we've got to find somebody to play the game with us, because the story says play the game. And so we start playing the game and we recruit people to be in the game with us. They're a little bit unwitting that they're involved in a game as well. Most heroes don't recognise themselves as heroes. Most martyrs don't recognise themselves as martyrs. Most martyrs will tell you that the world's a pretty cruel place. It's everyone else. It's not them. So most stories and most games have got an innocent or someone who claims to be the innocent participator. Would that make sense? Someone feeling persecuted is not going to say they've got a story and a game running. They're going to say the rest of the world is a bit nasty. Does that make sense? So stories inevitably have lots of justification, rationalisation and bullshit in them. And so the story and the game kind of go together. We recruit other people to be in the story, and then we blame them for being the way they are and for upsetting us. And we get nowhere. Meanwhile, all during that, what we do is we distract ourselves from what's going on, because if we saw it how it is, we would have to do something about it. If we can be blind to it, we don't have to do anything about it. So the advantage of being a dumbass, the advantage of not being aware, is I don't have to make any changes. And guess what happens to be the scariest thing that you're going to ask human beings to do? Change. You nailed it. You got it in one.